Have you ever wondered why some minds seem to move through the world like kings, even when their hands are empty, while others drown in chaos even when their pockets overflow? And could it be that the true difference between wealth and poverty is not money at all, but the invisible architecture of thought that either commands reality or is commanded by it? You are not here by accident, and you are not reading these words because of curiosity alone, but because somewhere deep inside you there is a restless intelligence that refuses to accept a small life, a quiet voice that knows it was meant to rule itself before it ever ruled a world. And this moment is the place where that voice finally steps forward and demands to be heard. Close your eyes for a second and imagine the world not as it is, but as a shifting ocean of invisible forces, a field of thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, where every person is both a signal and a receiver, broadcasting their inner state into the fabric of reality and pulling back circumstances that mirror their deepest convictions. And this is where Napoleon Hill begins, and where the Stoics quietly nod in agreement, because both understood that the outer world is only the shadow of the inner one, and that the mind, disciplined or undisciplined, is the ultimate ruler of fate. You have been taught to chase money, to chase recognition, to chase safety, but no one taught you to command your own thoughts. And that is why so many people run their entire lives without ever arriving anywhere that feels like home. There is a hidden war being fought inside every human being, a war between desire and fear, between vision and impulse, between the higher self that sees a future worth sacrificing for and the lower self that wants comfort right now. And most people lose this war not because they are weak, but because they never knew it was being fought in the first place. Napoleon Hill called it the battle between definite purpose and drifting, and the Stoics called it the battle between reason and passion, but they were pointing to the same eternal struggle, the moment when you either choose to direct your mind like a general commanding an army, or allow it to be dragged around like a prisoner by every emotion, every doubt, every distraction that enters your awareness. Think about the last time you felt truly powerful, not because you had money or status, but because you felt centered, focused, unshakable, as if nothing in the world could knock you off your path. And now think about how rare that feeling is in a society that profits from keeping you anxious, reactive, and perpetually dissatisfied. The modern world is a casino designed to keep your attention scattered, your emotions overstimulated, and your desires constantly inflamed, because a calm, disciplined mind cannot be easily controlled, and a person who governs their own inner state is the most dangerous thing to any system built on manipulation. This is why the Stoics trained themselves to be indifferent to pleasure and pain, and why Napoleon Hill insisted that desire must be guided by faith and disciplined imagination, because both paths lead to the same destination, a mind that is sovereign, a self that is ungovernable. When you understand this, you begin to see wealth not as something you chase, but as something that flows toward a certain quality of consciousness, a particular way of being that radiates confidence, clarity, and purpose, like a lighthouse in a storm. Money, opportunities, relationships, and influence are not random. They are attracted to those who have mastered the art of internal order, because the universe, in its cold and beautiful logic, always responds to coherence, and chaos can never create abundance. This is the law that Napoleon Hill called the law of attraction, and the Stoics understood it as living in accordance with nature, which is simply another way of saying that when your inner world is aligned, your outer world must eventually follow. But alignment is not something you stumble into by accident. It is forged in the quiet moments when no one is watching, in the instant when you choose discipline over indulgence, clarity over comfort, purpose over pleasure. And this is where most people turn back, because it is easier to scroll, to complain, to numb yourself with distractions. than it is to sit alone with your own thoughts and confront the terrifying truth that you are responsible for everything you become. The Stoics taught that you should treat every obstacle as a training ground, every insult as a test of your composure, every setback as a chance to strengthen your inner fortress. And Napoleon Hill taught that every failure contains the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit, but only for those who have the mental discipline to look for it instead of drowning in self-pity. Imagine what would happen if you combined these two philosophies into a single way of life. If you learned to desire wealth with burning intensity while remaining emotionally detached from outcomes, if you could hold a vision so vivid it reshapes your subconscious while staying calm enough to accept whatever path reality takes to bring it to you. This is the paradox that changes everything. The ability to think rich while acting stoic, to pursue greatness without being enslaved by it, to want more without needing more, to strive for the highest peaks while standing firm in the deepest stillness. And it is this balance that separates the few who rise from the many who merely survive. Most people think they want money, but what they really want is the feeling they believe money will give them, the sense of safety, freedom, and self-worth they have never learned to generate from within, and this is why they remain trapped in cycles of desperation and disappointment, because they are trying to use external things to fix an internal void. Napoleon Hill warned that poverty begins in the mind long before it appears in the bank account, and the Stoics would say that suffering is not caused by events, but by our judgments about those events. And when you see how perfectly these two truths fit together, you begin to realize that the real work of becoming rich is the work of becoming whole. To be whole means to no longer be at war with yourself, to have your desires, your beliefs, and your actions aligned in a single direction like a river flowing toward the sea. And this requires a ruthless honesty about who you are and who you want to become. You cannot manifest abundance while secretly believing you are unworthy of it, and you cannot cultivate inner peace. While constantly chasing validation from a world that will never be satisfied. And so the first step on this path is not to earn more, but to see more, to observe the patterns of your own mind with the same cold clarity a Stoic would bring to a battlefield, and the same imaginative faith Napoleon Hill would bring to a dream. Watch how your thoughts move, how quickly they jump to fear, to envy, to comparison, to excuses, and realize that these are not facts but habits. Grooves in the mind carved by repetition, and what has been carved can be reshaped. The subconscious does not know the difference between truth and belief. It only knows what you repeatedly tell it. And this is why Hill insisted on the power of autosuggestion, the deliberate feeding of the mind with images of success, because what you plant in the soil of your awareness will eventually grow into the reality you inhabit. The Stoics, in their own way, practiced the same thing by constantly reminding themselves of what they could and could not control, by training their perception to see events not as good or bad, but as neutral, waiting for their judgment to give them meaning. When you merge these practices, something extraordinary begins to happen. You become both the architect and the guardian of your inner world, designing it with intention and defending it with discipline. And this is the birthplace of true power. You no longer react to every insult or setback as if it were a personal attack, because you know that nothing outside you can touch the core of who you are unless you give it permission. And you no longer drift through life hoping for luck, because you are actively shaping your destiny through focused thought and purposeful action. This is the mindset that creates empires, not just in business, but in the soul. The world will try to tell you that you are small, that you are limited, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps of comfort you are given. But this is only because a person who knows their own power is impossible to exploit, and so the greatest rebellion you can commit is to master yourself. To wake up each day with a clear mind, a steady heart, and a burning vision is to live in a way that few people ever experience. And this is why the path you are stepping onto now feels both exhilarating and frightening, because it demands everything from you, and it promises something no external reward ever could, a sense of inner sovereignty that no one can take away. As this journey continues, you will be asked to confront your doubts, your fears, and the stories you have been telling yourself about what is possible, and you will discover that many of them were never yours to begin with, but inherited from a world that benefits from your hesitation. Napoleon Hill wrote that fear is the chief cause of failure, and the Stoics taught that fear is a judgment, not a fact. And when you finally see this, when you truly understand that the walls you feel around you are made of thought, not stone, you begin to sense the vastness of what you can become. This is not a promise of easy riches or effortless success, because both Hill and the Stoics despised shortcuts. This is a call to a higher standard of being, to a life where your mind is sharp, your emotions are disciplined, and your desires are guided by a vision so clear it pulls you forward even when the path is dark. You are being invited into a way of thinking that few people ever taste, a fusion of ambition and serenity, of hunger and harmony. And if you are willing to walk it, you will find that the world begins to respond to you differently, not because it has changed, but because you have. And as you sit here now, feeling the weight of these words settle into your awareness, you may start to sense that something inside you is shifting, a subtle reordering of priorities, a quiet determination rising beneath the noise of everyday life. And this is the first sign that the mindset you have been searching for is already awakening. You do not need to become someone else to be powerful. You need to remember who you were before fear taught you to doubt yourself, before society told you to be small, before you learned to confuse comfort with happiness. And that remembering is the beginning of everything. This is only the opening of a much deeper journey, a descent into the hidden mechanics of the mind, and a climb toward a level of self-mastery that transforms not only what you achieve, but who you are. And as we move forward, you will begin to see how every thought, every emotion, every choice is a thread in the tapestry of your destiny. The question is no longer whether this knowledge is real, but whether you are ready to live as if it is, to think rich in your vision and act stoic in your soul, and to step into a life where power and peace are no longer opposites, but two sides of the same unbreakable self. The moment you begin to accept that your inner world is the true engine of your destiny, something unsettling and liberating happens at the same time, because you realize that no one is coming to save you, and no one is holding you back either. And this dual truth is the doorway to both terror and freedom. Napoleon Hill called this awakening the discovery of definite purpose, the instant when a person stops drifting through other people's expectations and starts living by a vision that feels so real it becomes unavoidable. And the Stoics would describe the same moment as waking up to the fact that you are responsible for your judgments, your reactions, and ultimately your character. It is here, in this narrow space between what you want and who you choose to be, that a human life either becomes extraordinary or quietly disappears into the background of history. Most people never learn how much power they surrender every time they let an emotion decide their actions, every time anger makes them speak, fear makes them hide, or desire makes them betray their own long-term goals for a short-term pleasure. They believe they are being authentic when they are really being predictable, and predictability is the enemy of power. The Stoics understood that a person who is ruled by impulse is as vulnerable as a city without walls, open to every invasion from the outside world, while Napoleon Hill saw that a person who lacks emotional control cannot maintain the focused faith necessary to turn imagination into reality. When your mind is scattered, your life becomes scattered, and when your emotions are undisciplined, your future becomes fragile. To think rich is not simply to think about money, it is to think in terms of possibilities, of expansion, of what could exist if you refused to accept the limits imposed by your past, or by the opinions of others. But this kind of thinking is dangerous if it is not balanced by Stoic discipline, because without emotional mastery, ambition turns into anxiety and vision turns into obsession. You start to measure your worth by external results, by how fast things are happening, by how much validation you receive, and when reality does not move at the speed of your desire, you collapse into frustration and doubt. This is why so many people burn out on their own dreams, because they wanted success more than they wanted self-mastery, and without the latter, the former becomes a source of suffering rather than fulfillment. The Stoics trained themselves to see every desire as a potential chain, something that could either pull them forward or trap them in a cycle of craving and disappointment, and Napoleon Hill taught that desire must be refined, focused, and fueled by faith rather than desperation. When you desire something because you believe it completes you, you give it power over your peace, but when you desire something because it expresses who you are, it becomes a tool rather than a tyrant. This is the subtle shift that changes everything. The moment when you stop needing the world to give you permission to feel worthy and start using the world as a canvas on which to paint your purpose. Imagine a person who wakes up every day with a clear vision of what they are building, not just in terms of money or status, but in terms of character, contribution, and inner strength, and who moves through their day with the calm focus of someone who knows that nothing outside them can shake their center unless they allow it. This person does not panic when plans fail, because they understand that obstacles are part of the process, and they do not become arrogant when things go well, because they know that fortune is always temporary. They are driven without being desperate, ambitious without being anxious, and this is the quiet power that draws opportunities and allies into their life like gravity. Napoleon Hill wrote that the subconscious mind is the bridge between thought and reality, the hidden workshop where ideas are turned into outcomes, and the Stoics, in their own language, spoke of the ruling faculty of the mind, the part of you that chooses how to interpret events and therefore how to experience them. When you fill this inner workshop with images of fear, scarcity, and self-doubt, you cannot be surprised when your outer life reflects the same poverty of spirit, but when you deliberately feed it visions of strength, abundance, and purpose, you begin to notice that the world seems to open doors you did not even know existed. This is not magic in the childish sense. It is the natural result of a mind that has learned to see and act in alignment with its highest intentions. Yet there is a danger here that few people talk about, the danger of becoming attached to the image of success rather than the reality of growth, of falling in love with the fantasy of who you might become instead of doing the daily, often boring work of becoming that person. The Stoics warned against this kind of self-deception, reminding themselves that virtue is proven in action, not in imagination, and Napoleon Hill insisted that persistence is the only reliable measure of genuine desire. When you truly want something, you do not need to constantly announce it to the world, you simply keep moving toward it, even when no one is watching, even when there is no applause, even when doubt whispers that you are wasting your time. This is where emotional discipline becomes the backbone of manifestation, because the subconscious is always listening to how you respond to setbacks, to delays, to uncertainty, and it takes its cues from your reactions. If you collapse every time something goes wrong, you are training your mind to associate your vision with pain and frustration. But if you remain steady, if you treat every challenge as part of the journey, you teach your inner world that your goal is safe, that it is worth pursuing, and that you are strong enough to see it through. Over time, this creates a quiet confidence that no amount of positive thinking alone could ever produce, because it is rooted in lived experience rather than empty hope. The Stoics practiced something called negative visualization, the deliberate imagining of loss and hardship, not to become pessimistic, but to become resilient, to strip events of their power to shock and destabilize them. When you combine this with Napoleon Hill's practice of visualizing success, you create a mind that is both bold and unbreakable, able to dream big without being shattered by reality when it does not immediately cooperate. You can hold a vision of wealth and achievement while calmly accepting that the path to get there may be long, difficult, and unpredictable, and this acceptance paradoxically makes you more powerful because you are no longer at war with what is. You are simply using it as raw material for what could be. Think of how much energy you waste worrying about things you cannot control, about what other people think, about whether the timing is right, about whether you are good enough. And imagine redirecting all of that mental force into disciplined action and focused imagination. The Stoics would say that peace comes from aligning your will with what you can influence, and Napoleon Hill would say that success comes from concentrating your thoughts on a single, definite purpose. And when these two principles merge, you become unstoppable, not because nothing can go wrong, but because nothing that goes wrong can truly stop you. There is a profound loneliness on this path that no one prepares you for, the loneliness of no longer being able to blame circumstances, parents, society, or bad luck for where you are. The loneliness of knowing that every choice you make is a brick in the structure of your future, and that if you do not like the building you are living in, you must be willing to tear down and rebuild your own habits. This is why most people retreat back into excuses and distractions, because it is easier to complain about the world than it is to take responsibility for your own mind. But if you can endure this loneliness, if you can sit with the weight of your own potential without flinching, you begin to experience a strange and powerful sense of freedom. Freedom is not the absence of obligation, it is the presence of self-mastery, the ability to choose your actions based on your highest values rather than your strongest impulses. And this is the kind of freedom that no amount of money alone can buy. A person who is rich but emotionally enslaved is still a prisoner, while a person who is poor but mentally disciplined has the seeds of greatness already planted within them. Napoleon Hill understood this when he wrote that riches begin in the form of thought, and the Stoics understood it when they taught that the only true good is a virtuous, well-ordered mind. As you move deeper into this way of thinking, you may start to notice how often your old patterns try to pull you back, how the urge to seek approval, to avoid discomfort, to give up when things get hard still whispers in your ear, and this is not a sign that you are failing, it is a sign that you are changing. Every habit fights to survive, and your old self will not disappear quietly. But this is where the fusion of Napoleon Hill's faith and Stoic endurance becomes your greatest ally. Because you can believe in a future that does not yet exist, while calmly enduring the present as it is. This is the alchemy of the mind, the transformation of fear into focus, of doubt into discipline, of desire into destiny. And it is happening whether you are aware of it or not, but awareness gives you the power to guide it. You are no longer just a passenger in your own life, reacting to whatever happens. You are becoming the pilot, setting a course and adjusting for turbulence without losing sight of where you are going. This is not a dramatic, cinematic change that happens overnight. It is a quiet, relentless shift that unfolds one thought, one choice, one moment of self-control at a time, and over months and years it reshapes everything. And as you continue to listen, to reflect, to let these ideas sink into the deeper layers of your consciousness, you may begin to sense that the person you have been is slowly giving way to the person you are becoming, and that this transitio, though uncomfortable, is the most important journey you will ever take. You are learning to think rich in your vision, to see a future of abundance, impact, and meaning, and to act stoic in your behavior, to remain calm, disciplined, and grounded, no matter what storms rise around you. And this combination, once it takes root, becomes a force that nothing in the external world can easily resist. The road ahead will demand more from you than you are used to giving, but it will also give you more than you ever imagined possible, not just in terms of wealth or success, but in terms of who you are when you look in the mirror and see someone who is no longer afraid of their own potential. This is the quiet revolution taking place within you right now, the merging of ambition and serenity into a single unstoppable will. And as it deepens, you will find that the world begins to feel less like an enemy and more like a field of opportunity, waiting for a mind brave enough and disciplined enough to claim it. When a mind begins to stabilize under its own authority, when it no longer flinches at every fluctuation of circumstance, something profound starts to emerge, a sense that life is no longer happening to you but through you. And this is the turning point where philosophy becomes power. Napoleon Hill described this state as the alignment of conscious desire with subconscious belief, the moment when what you want is no longer just a wish but a conviction. And the Stoics would recognize it as the rule of the rational mind over the chaos of impulse, where you are no longer dragged by your emotions but guided by your principles. In this state, you do not beg reality for permission. To succeed, you quietly assume that you will, and this assumption shapes every choice you make. Most people live in a constant state of inner contradiction, wanting one thing while believing another, dreaming of abundance while expecting disappointment. And this tension creates a kind of psychic friction that exhausts them long before they ever get close to their goals. They visualize success for a few minutes and then spend the rest of the day rehearsing their fears, and the subconscious, which is always listening, takes the louder, more emotionally charged message as the truth. Napoleon Hill warned that doubt and indecision are the twin enemies of achievement, and the Stoics would add that an undisciplined mind is its own worst tyrant, constantly sabotaging itself with unnecessary suffering. When you understand this, you begin to see that the real work is not to force the world to change, but to bring your own inner signals into coherence. Coherence is when your thoughts, emotions, and actions all point in the same direction, like a perfectly aligned beam of light that can cut through steel. And this is what both ancient Stoics and modern success philosophers were pointing toward in their own language. A scattered mind, no matter how intelligent, produces scattered results, but a focused mind, even with modest resources, can move mountains over time. This is why the Stoics trained themselves to simplify their desires, to strip away what was unnecessary and concentrate on what truly mattered, and why Napoleon Hill insisted on a single, definite purpose as the cornerstone of all achievement. When you choose one vision and commit to it fully, you give your subconscious a clear target, and it begins to organize your perceptions, your opportunities, and your energy around that aim. Yet clarity alone is not enough, because the path to any meaningful goal is inevitably lined with uncertainty, delay, and moments of apparent failure, and it is here that most people lose their nerve. They interpret obstacles as signs that they are not meant to succeed, that the universe is against them, that they should settle for something smaller, safer, and less demanding. The Stoics would call this a failure of judgment, confusing external events with internal worth, and Napoleon Hill would say it is the voice of fear disguising itself as reason. In truth, every challenge you face is a test of how deeply you believe in your own vision, and whether that belief is strong enough to survive the discomfort of growth. Think about how many times you have abandoned something important, not because it was impossible, but because it became uncomfortable, because the initial excitement faded and the real work began. And notice how this pattern has shaped your life. Comfort is the great seducer, always whispering that you have done enough, that you deserve to rest, that you can continue tomorrow, and tomorrow quietly turns into never. The Stoics warned against this softening of the will, teaching that virtue is forged through effort and self-denial, and Napoleon Hill saw that persistence, The capacity to keep going when enthusiasm dies is the only quality that separates those who succeed from those who merely try. When you can endure boredom, frustration, and uncertainty without quitting, you become a rare kind of person in a world addicted to instant gratification. This endurance does not come from brute force alone. It comes from a deep, internalized sense of meaning, from knowing why you are doing what you are doing and what it represents about who you are becoming. When your goal is tied to your identity, when it is not just something you want, but something that expresses your deepest values, you can withstand almost any difficulty, because quitting would feel like a betrayal of yourself. Napoleon Hill wrote about this in terms of burning desire, a longing so intense that it becomes a driving force in your life, and the Stoics would see it as living in accordance with your highest nature, acting in harmony with what you know to be right. In both cases, the source of strength is the same, a commitment that goes beyond pleasure or pain. As you cultivate this commitment, you begin to notice a subtle shift in how you experience the world, a growing distance between you and your emotional reactions, a space where you can observe fear, anger, or disappointment without being consumed by them. This is the Stoic practice of inner detachment, the ability to see emotions as events in the mind rather than commands you must obey. And it pairs perfectly with Napoleon Hill's emphasis on faith. Because when you are not overwhelmed by your feelings, you can choose to believe in your vision even when it is not emotionally convenient. You no longer need to feel confident to act confidently. You simply decide to move forward because that is who you have chosen to be. In this state, manifestation stops being something mystical and becomes something practical, a natural consequence of consistent thought and action aligned toward a clear goal. You begin to notice opportunities that you would have ignored before, to take risks that you would have avoided, to speak and act with a quiet authority that signals to others that you are serious about your intentions. The world responds to this seriousness not because it is magical, but because people and circumstances are drawn to those who radiate certainty and self-control. This is the unspoken social law behind Napoleon Hill's teachings, and the Stoics' emphasis on character, that a person who knows their own mind becomes a magnet for trust, cooperation, and influence. But with this growing power comes a new kind of responsibility, because the more you realize that your thoughts shape your reality, the less you can hide behind excuses or blame. You see how every moment of self-pity, every story of victimhood, every indulgence in negativity is a choice that pushes you further from the life you claim to want. The Stoics would say that you are always free to choose your response, and Napoleon Hill would say that you are always planting seeds in the garden of your mind, whether you are aware of it or not. When you truly accept this, you begin to guard your inner world with the same care you would guard a treasure, because you know that everything you experience begins there. This guarding is not about suppressing emotions or denying reality. It is about refusing to let anything that does not serve your highest purpose take up permanent residence in your consciousness. You can feel sadness without becoming hopeless. You can experience fear without becoming paralyzed. You can acknowledge obstacles without surrendering your vision. And this emotional agility is what allows you to move through life with both intensity and grace. Napoleon Hill spoke of this as maintaining a positive mental attitude, not in a shallow, forced way, but as a disciplined refusal to dwell on defeat. And the Stoics would recognize it as the practice of keeping your ruling faculty clear and undisturbed. As this discipline deepens, you may find that your relationships, your habits, and even your ambitions begin to change, because you no longer tolerate what drains your energy or distracts you from your purpose. You become more selective about where you invest your attention, more careful about what you allow into your mind, and more deliberate about how you spend your time. And this selectivity is not arrogance, It is respect for your own potential. When you know what you are capable of becoming, you stop wasting yourself on what does not matter. And this is one of the quietest yet most powerful transformations a human being can undergo. There will be moments when this path feels isolating, when the people around you do not understand why you no longer complain as much, why you no longer chase the same pleasures, why you seem so focused on something they cannot see. And this is where both Napoleon Hill and the Stoics would tell you to trust your own inner compass. The masses have always been guided by habit and fear, and the few who create new realities have always had to walk ahead of the crowd, often alone, guided by a vision that only they can feel. This solitude is not a punishment, it is the price of greatness, and if you can accept it without bitterness, it becomes a source of incredible strength. In the quiet moments, when no one else is watching, when there is no applause or recognition, you will come to understand the true nature of what you are building, not just a successful life, but a mind that is clear, resilient, and deeply aligned with its own purpose. This is the ultimate wealth, the kind that does not fluctuate with markets or circumstances, the kind that stays with you no matter what you lose or gain in the external world. Napoleon Hill hinted at this when he wrote that true riches include peace of mind, and the Stoics built their entire philosophy around it, knowing that a person who has mastered themselves has already achieved something more valuable than any fortune. And as this realization settles into you, you may begin to sense that the journey you are on is no longer just about achieving a goal, but about becoming a certain kind of person. Someone who can stand calmly in the center of chaos, who can pursue their dreams without being consumed by them, who can lose without being broken, and win without being corrupted. This is the fusion of thinking rich and acting stoic, a way of being that is both fiercely ambitious and deeply grounded, and as it continues to unfold within you, it will reshape not only what you do, but how you experience every moment of your life. As this deeper alignment between vision and discipline continues to take hold, you begin to notice something that most people never consciously realize, that reality itself starts to feel more responsive, not because the universe has suddenly decided to favor you, but because your perception, your decisions, and your emotional steadiness have reached a level where you can finally recognize and act on what was always available. Napoleon Hill described this as the power of the subconscious mind working in harmony with a definite purpose, and the Stoics would see it as living in accordance with reason, where you are no longer blinded by impulsive reactions or distorted by unnecessary fear. When these two forces unite, your life stops being a random series of events and becomes a deliberate unfolding. One of the most misunderstood ideas in the philosophy of success is the concept of control, because people often confuse it with domination over external circumstances, when in truth, the only control that ever truly matters is the one you exercise over your own inner state. The Stoics were relentless in this teaching, reminding themselves daily that everything outside their own judgments and actions was ultimately beyond their command. And Napoleon Hill, in his own way, taught the same thing by focusing on the mastery of thought as the source of all achievement. When you try to control what other people think, how fast success comes, or whether the world cooperates with your plans, you create endless anxiety. But when you focus on controlling how you think, how you act, and how you interpret what happens, you step into a calm, unshakable power. This power is subtle, and because it does not announce itself with noise or drama, it is often overlooked. But it is the foundation of every great life. A person who can remain emotionally steady in the face of insult, disappointment, or delay has an advantage that no amount of raw intelligence or natural talent can match, because they do not waste energy on resistance or resentment. They move forward while others argue with reality, and this forward motion, sustained over time, creates momentum that looks like luck from the outside. Napoleon Hill called this the law of rhythm, the idea that consistent, focused effort sets forces in motion that eventually return multiplied, and the Stoics would simply say that a rational, disciplined mind naturally produces better outcomes. When you start to live this way, you may find that your old emotional habits feel almost foreign, as if they belong to a different version of you, someone who was always reacting, always craving, always worrying about things that are ultimately beyond human control. You still feel emotions, but they no longer run the show. They become information rather than commands, signals that you can acknowledge and then decide how to respond to. This is not emotional numbness, it is emotional sovereignty, the ability to experience the full range of human feeling without being enslaved by it. And it is one of the greatest gifts the Stoics left to the world. Napoleon Hill would tell you that this emotional sovereignty is essential for maintaining faith in your vision, because doubt is nothing more than a feeling that has been allowed to masquerade as truth. When you can sit with doubt without letting it dictate your actions, you discover that it loses its power, becoming just another passing state rather than a permanent verdict on your future. The same is true of fear, jealousy, and frustration. All of them are temporary waves in the mind, and when you stop identifying with them, you can continue moving toward your goals even when they are present. This is what it means to act stoic in a world that constantly tries to provoke and destabilize you. At the same time, thinking rich requires a certain boldness, S of imagination, a willingness to see beyond your current circumstances and to hold an image of a future that does not yet exist. This is not wishful thinking. It is a disciplined form of creative vision where you repeatedly impress your subconscious with the idea of who you are becoming and what you are building. Over time, this inner picture begins to influence your behavior in subtle but powerful ways, guiding you toward opportunities, shaping how you speak and carry yourself, and even altering how others perceive you. People are drawn to those who seem to know where they are going, and this quiet certainty is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can possess. The danger, however, is that imagination without discipline can turn into fantasy, a pleasant escape from reality rather than a force that shapes it, and this is why the Stoic element of this mindset is so crucial. By grounding your vision in daily practice, by showing up and doing the work even when you do not feel inspired, you anchor your dreams in the physical world. You stop waiting for motivation and start relying on commitment, and commitment, unlike emotion, does not disappear when things get difficult. Napoleon Hill wrote that successful people make habits of doing things failures do not like to do, and the Stoics would agree, seeing virtue as something cultivated through repeated, sometimes uncomfortable action. As you continue to refine this way of being, you may notice that time itself seems to take on a different quality. The days no longer blur together in a haze of distraction and anxiety, but become meaningful units of progress, each one a chance to move a little closer to the person you want to become. This is the result of living with intention, of having a clear sense of purpose that organizes your priorities and gives structure to your efforts. When you know what you are aiming for, you can let go of countless small temptations and trivial worries, because they no longer compete with something that matters more. This letting go is one of the most liberating aspects of the Stoic influence on success, because it frees you from the exhausting need to have everything go your way. You do your best, you act with integrity, you pursue your vision with discipline, and then you release the outcome, trusting that whatever happens will be something you can learn from and use. Napoleon Hill would say that this trust is faith, the quiet conviction that your efforts are not in vain even when you cannot yet see the results. And the Stoics would call it acceptance of fate, the understanding that life unfolds according to laws far larger than any individual's plans. When these two attitudes merge, you can work intensely without becoming emotionally fragile because you are no longer hinging. your sense of worth on immediate success. In this state, even failure begins to change its meaning, losing its sting and becoming a kind of feedback, a signal that shows you what to adjust, what to strengthen, what to try differently next time. You no longer interpret setbacks as proof that you are not good enough, but as part of the refining process that every worthwhile endeavor requires. This is why so many of the people Napoleon Hill studied experienced repeated defeats before achieving great success, and why the Stoics saw adversity as an opportunity to practice courage, patience, and wisdom. When you embrace this perspective, nothing that happens to you is ever truly wasted. There is a deep, quiet joy that comes from living this way, a satisfaction that does not depend on applause or approval, but on the knowledge that you are doing what you believe is right and necessary. This joy is not loud or flashy. It is steady, like a fire that burns without needing constant fuel, and it gives you the strength to continue even when the path is long and the rewards are far away. Napoleon Hill hinted at this when he spoke of the happiness that comes from working toward a worthy goal, and the Stoics knew it as eudaimonia, the flourishing of a life lived in harmony with its own values. As you move deeper into this mindset, you may begin to see that wealth, in its truest sense, is not just about what you accumulate, but about who you become in the process of striving. Money can amplify your life, but it cannot give it meaning, and power can open doors, but it cannot tell you which ones are worth walking through. That wisdom comes from within, from the steady cultivation of a mind that is both ambitious and grounded, both visionary and disciplined. This is the quiet synthesis of Napoleon Hill and the Stoics, a way of being that allows you to pursue greatness without losing your soul, to build a powerful life without becoming a prisoner of your own desires. And as this synthesis continues to deepen within you, you may start to feel that your sense of identity is shifting, that you are no longer defined by what happens to you, but by how you choose to meet it. This is the true beginning of mastery, the moment when you realize that no matter where you are or what you are facing, you always have the power to bring clarity, courage, and purpose to the situation. From this place, the world becomes not a threat to your peace, but a stage on which you can express your highest self, and this realization, once it takes root, will continue to grow and reshape your life in ways you are only beginning to imagine. As this inner architecture of discipline and vision becomes stronger, you begin to sense a quiet shift in how you inhabit your own mind, a feeling that you are no longer merely reacting to thoughts and emotions as they appear, but standing behind them, watching, choosing, directing, and this is where true self-mastery begins to feel real. Napoleon Hill spoke of this as gaining control over the subconscious, the ability to impress it with deliberate intention rather than letting it be shaped by random impressions from the outside world. And the Stoics would describe it as the cultivation of the ruling faculty, the part of you that decides what is worthy of attention and what can be calmly ignored. When this faculty is strong, your life becomes less chaotic, less driven by impulse, and far more aligned with your deepest aims. Most people do not realize how often their inner world is being colonized by the fears, opinions, and emotional turbulence of others. How a single conversation, a single headline, or a single memory can hijack their mood and derail their focus for hours or even days. They think these reactions are just part of being human, but the Stoics knew that this was a kind of slavery, a subtle but pervasive loss of sovereignty over one's own mind. Napoleon Hill saw the same pattern in people who allowed doubt, criticism, and pessimism to seep into their thinking, weakening their faith in their own ability to succeed. To think rich and act stoic is to close the gates of this inner city, to decide consciously what you will allow to influence you and what you will quietly refuse. This refusal is not a form of denial, it is a form of strategic discipline. a recognition that your mental and emotional energy is one of the most valuable resources you have, and that wasting it on worry, resentment, or comparison is a kind of self-betrayal. When you become more protective of this energy, you start to notice how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious habits of thought, by stories you tell yourself about what is possible, about who you are, about what you deserve. Napoleon Hill taught that these stories can be rewritten, that the subconscious is malleable and responsive to repetition and emotional intensity, and the Stoics would add that through reason and practice you can train yourself to see these stories for what they are, interpretations rather than facts. As you rewrite these inner narratives, you may feel a strange mixture of excitement and discomfort, because letting go of old beliefs, even limiting ones, can feel like losing a part of yourself. The mind clings to what is familiar, even when it is painful, because familiarity offers a sense of safety, but growth always requires stepping into the unknown. This is where courage becomes essential, not the dramatic kind that charges into battle, but the quiet kind that sits with uncertainty without fleeing, that allows a new self to emerge without rushing back to the old one. Napoleon Hill called this faith the willingness to believe in a future you cannot yet see, and the Stoics would see it as trusting your own capacity to meet whatever comes with reason and composure. In this space of courage and discipline, something remarkable begins to happen. Your sense of self becomes less tied to external validation and more rooted in your own values and intentions. You start to care less about being admired and more about being aligned, less about looking successful and more about actually becoming someone you respect. This shift is subtle but profound, because it frees you from the endless emotional roller coaster of praise and criticism, success and failure, and anchors you in something far more stable. Napoleon Hill would say that you are no longer dependent on the opinions of others for your self-esteem, and the Stoics would say that you are living in accordance with your own rational nature. From this place of inner stability, your actions become more deliberate and more powerful, because they are no longer driven by a need to prove yourself, but by a genuine commitment to your purpose. You work not to escape insecurity, but to express your potential. And this makes a tremendous difference in both the quality and the sustainability of your efforts. When you are not constantly seeking approval or fearing rejection, you can take bold steps, make difficult decisions, and stay the course even when the results are slow to appear. This is the kind of perseverance that Napoleon Hill identified as one of the key traits of successful people. And it is the same perseverance the Stoics practiced in their pursuit of virtue and wisdom. As your perseverance grows, you may begin to notice that challenges no longer feel as personal as they once did, that setbacks do not cut as deeply, that even failure carries a strange, almost impersonal quality, as if it is simply part of the process rather than a verdict on your worth. This emotional distance does not make you cold or indifferent. It makes you resilient, because you can experience disappointment without being destroyed by it. The Stoics trained themselves to see events as neutral, waiting for their judgment to give them meaning, and Napoleon Hill taught that every setback contains the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. When you hold both of these truths, you begin to see that nothing that happens to you is ever entirely negative unless you choose to make it so. This choice, repeated over and over, is what gradually transforms your inner world into a place of strength rather than fear, of clarity rather than confusion. And from this inner world flows a very different kind of life. You start to notice opportunities where others see obstacles, to feel gratitude where others feel resentment, to sense possibility where others feel trapped. And this difference in perception quietly but relentlessly shapes your destiny. The world you experience is, in many ways, a reflection of the lens through which you view it, and when that lens is polished by discipline and faith, everything looks and feels different. There is a deep peace that emerges from this way of living, not the fragile peace that depends on everything going well, but a durable peace that can coexist with struggle, uncertainty, and even loss. This peace is the natural result of knowing that no matter what happens, you have the inner resources to respond with dignity. Thank you, intelligence and purpose. Napoleon Hill spoke of peace of mind as one of the greatest riches a person can have, and the Stoics devoted their lives to cultivating it, knowing that without it, no amount of external success can ever truly satisfy. As you continue to integrate these ideas into your own thinking, you may find that your goals begin to take on a deeper meaning, that they are no longer just about acquiring things, but about creating a life that reflects your highest ideals. You may still want wealth, influence, and achievement, but now they are seen as tools rather than trophies, ways to express your values and to contribute to something larger than yourself. This shift does not weaken your ambition, it purifies it, removing the desperation and replacing it with a steady, confident drive that can endure over the long haul. In this purified ambition, there is a sense of quiet inevitability, a feeling that as long as you continue to show up, to think clearly, to act with discipline and courage, the life you are working toward will eventually take shape. You do not need to know exactly how it will happen because you trust the process you are engaged in, the daily practice of aligning your thoughts, emotions, and actions with your highest vision. This trust is not blind, it is built on experience, on the repeated proof that when you act in accordance with your best self, things tend to move in the right direction. And as this trust deepens, you may begin to feel a growing sense of gratitude, not just for what you have already achieved, but for the very opportunity to strive, to grow, to become something more than you were. This gratitude is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It arises from the recognition that you are alive, conscious and capable of shaping your own destiny, and that in itself is a kind of wealth that few people ever fully appreciate. In this gratitude, there is a quiet joy that sustains you through difficulty and keeps your heart open even as your mind remains sharp and disciplined. This is the state of being that lies at the heart of thinking rich and acting stoic, a way of moving through the world with both fire and calm, with both ambition and acceptance. And as you settle more deeply into it, you may begin to sense that the person you are becoming is not just more successful, but more whole, more grounded, and more at peace with the unfolding of their own life. As this inner architecture of discipline and vision becomes stronger, you begin to sense a quiet shift in how you inhabit your own mind, a feeling that you are no longer merely reacting to thoughts and emotions as they appear, but standing behind them, watching, choosing, directing, and this is where true self-mastery begins to feel real. Napoleon Hill spoke of this as gaining control over the subconscious, the ability to impress it with deliberate intention rather than letting it be shaped by random impressions from the outside world. And the Stoics would describe it as the cultivation of the ruling faculty, the part of you that decides what is worthy of attention and what can be calmly ignored. When this faculty is strong, your life becomes less chaotic, less driven by impulse, and far more aligned with your deepest aims. Most people do not realize how often their inner world is being colonized by the fears, opinions, and emotional turbulence of others. How a single conversation, a single headline, or a single memory can hijack their mood and derail their focus for hours or even days. They think these reactions are just part of being human, but the Stoics knew that this was a kind of slavery, a subtle but pervasive loss of sovereignty over one's own mind. Napoleon Hill saw the same pattern in people who allowed doubt, criticism, and pessimism to seep into their thinking, weakening their faith in their own ability to succeed. To think rich and act stoic is to close the gates of this inner city, to decide consciously what you will allow to influence you and what you will quietly refuse. This refusal is not a form of denial, it is a form of strategic discipline, a recognition that your mental and emotional energy is one of the most valuable resources you have, and that wasting it on worry, resentment, or comparison is a kind of self-betrayal. When you become more protective of this energy, you start to notice how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious habits of thought, by stories you tell yourself about what is possible, about who you are, about what you deserve. Napoleon Hill taught that these stories can be rewritten, that the subconscious is malleable and responsive to repetition and emotional intensity, and the Stoics would add that through reason and practice you can train yourself to see these stories for what they are, interpretations rather than facts. As you rewrite these inner narratives, you may feel a strange mixture of excitement and discomfort, because letting go of old beliefs, even limiting ones, can feel like losing a part of yourself. The mind clings to what is familiar, even when it is painful, because familiarity offers a sense of safety, but growth always requires stepping into the unknown. This is where courage becomes essential, not the dramatic kind that charges into battle, but the quiet kind that sits with uncertainty without fleeing, that allows a new self to emerge without rushing back to the old one. Napoleon Hill called this faith, the willingness to believe in a future you cannot yet see, and the Stoics would see it as trusting your own capacity to meet whatever comes with reason and composure. In this space of courage and discipline, something remarkable begins to happen. Your sense of self becomes less tied to external validation and more rooted in your own values and intentions. You start to care less about being admired and more about being aligned, less about looking successful and more about actually becoming someone you respect. This shift is subtle but profound, because it frees you from the endless emotional roller coaster of praise and criticism, success and failure, and anchors you in something far more stable. Napoleon Hill would say that you are no longer dependent on the opinions of others for your self-esteem, and the Stoics would say that you are living in accordance with your own rational nature. From this place of inner stability, your actions become more deliberate and more powerful, because they are no longer driven by a need to prove yourself, but by a genuine commitment to your purpose. You work not to escape insecurity, but to express your potential. And this makes a tremendous difference in both the quality and the sustainability of your efforts. When you are not constantly seeking approval or fearing rejection, you can take bold steps, make difficult decisions, and stay the course even when the results are slow to appear. This is the kind of perseverance that Napoleon Hill identified as one of the key traits of successful people, and it is the same perseverance the Stoics practiced in their pursuit of virtue and wisdom. As your perseverance grows, you may begin to notice that challenges no longer feel as personal as they once did, that setbacks do not cut as deeply, that even failure carries a strange, almost impersonal quality, as if it is simply part of the process rather than a verdict on your worth. This emotional distance does not make you cold or indifferent. It makes you resilient, because you can experience disappointment without being destroyed by it. The Stoics trained themselves to see events as neutral, waiting for their judgment to give them meaning. And Napoleon Hill taught that every setback contains the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. When you hold both of these truths, you begin to see that nothing that happens to you is ever entirely negative unless you choose to make it so. This choice, repeated over and over, is what gradually transforms your inner world into a place of strength rather than fear, of clarity rather than confusion. And from this inner world flows a very different kind of life. You start to notice opportunities where others see obstacles, to feel gratitude where others feel resentment, to sense possibility where others feel trapped, and this difference in perception quietly but relentlessly shapes your destiny. The world you experience is, in many ways, a reflection of the lens through which you view it. And when that lens is polished, where discipline and faith, everything looks and feels different. There is a deep peace that emerges from this way of living, not the fragile peace that depends on everything going well, but a durable peace that can coexist with struggle, uncertainty, and even loss. This peace is the natural result of knowing that no matter what happens, you have the inner resources to respond with dignity, intelligence, and purpose. Napoleon Hill spoke of peace of mind as one of the greatest riches a person can have, and the Stoics devoted their lives to cultivating it, knowing that without it, no amount of external success can ever truly satisfy. As you continue to integrate these ideas into your own thinking, you may find that your goals begin to take on a deeper meaning, that they are no longer just about acquiring things, but about creating a life that reflects your highest ideals. You may still want wealth, influence, and achievement, but now they are seen as tools rather than trophies, ways to express your values and to contribute to something larger than yourself. This shift does not weaken your ambition. It purifies it, removing the desperation and replacing it with a steady, confident drive that can endure over the long haul. In this purified ambition, there is a sense of quiet inevitability, a feeling that as long as you continue to show up, to think clearly, to act with discipline and courage, the life you are working toward will eventually take shape. You do not need to know exactly how it will happen, because you trust the process you are engaged in, the daily practice of aligning your thoughts, emotions, and actions with your highest vision. This trust is not blind. It is built on experience, on the repeated proof that when you act in accordance with your best self, things tend to move in the right direction. And as this trust deepens, you may begin to feel a growing sense of gratitude, not just for what you have already achieved, but for the very opportunity to strive, to grow, to become something more than you were. This gratitude is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It arises from the recognition that you are alive, conscious, and capable of shaping your own destiny. And that, in itself, is a kind of wealth that few people ever fully appreciate. In this gratitude, there is a quiet joy that sustains you,